Creatures that were never supposed to exist are showing up in hospital footage. These footage were leaked by horrified hospital staff members who could no longer hide the truth about what was lurking in their hospital corridors, says everything in one sharp sentence. Some of these things were found on operating tables doing things that sent scientists running. Others were discovered in morgues in conditions nobody has ever been able to explain. They look like nothing you have ever seen in your entire life. Every single one of them is real, and what you are about to watch is the most disturbing hospital footage ever captured on camera. The smoking apparition. A night watchman at a hospital in Gary, Indiana was doing his late-night rounds when he walked past an empty morgue and saw a smoky hovering figure above one of the beds. 6 days later, in the same building, he turned a corner and found a hospital bed sitting in the middle of a hallway with a dark human-shaped figure moving slowly beside it. On the 7th night, it happened again in a completely different part of the building. People who have studied this footage have pointed out something that is hard to dismiss. This was not a one-time event that could be blamed on exhaustion or imagination. This was the same building, the same man, and 2 separate encounters 6 days apart. The hospital has never provided any explanation for either one. Here is what makes this deeply unsettling beyond just the 2 sightings. Gary, Indiana has one of the highest death rates of any city in America. That hospital had seen decades of tragedy within its walls, deaths that were sudden, violent, and unresolved. Paranormal researchers who investigated the building believe the encounter was not a random apparition. They believe the figure the watchman saw was the ghost of an angry patient who had died in that hospital under circumstances that were never fully investigated. Someone whose death had been quietly filed away without proper answers. The second encounter in the hallway, the bed appearing from nowhere with a figure standing beside it, they believe was the same presence escalating, trying to be seen, demanding to be acknowledged. The watchman saw it twice. Some researchers believe if he had stayed long enough, there would have been a 3rd time, and that the 3rd time would have been something neither of them was ready for. A body that wouldn't stay dead. Staff at a Texas hospital were in the preparation room getting a recently deceased patient ready for final arrangements when the body began to move. Not a small twitch. The body moved in repeated sustained motions that went on for nearly 2 full minutes. The doctors in the room were so completely shaken that they froze. One of them reportedly struck the body and screamed at it to stop. Another backed into the corner of the room and could not move. Nobody intervened medically. Nobody approached the table. They just stood there in absolute shock, watching a dead body move continuously for 2 minutes, and had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Some people who watched this footage refuse to accept any natural explanation. They believe that patient was never actually dead. Others believe something far darker was happening in that room. Here is the theory that has circulated most persistently among people who have studied this footage closely. That hospital had reportedly experienced a series of unexplained incidents in the weeks before this event. Equipment malfunctioning without cause, staff reporting feelings of being watched in empty rooms, a junior nurse who had resigned abruptly just days before, claiming she had seen something she refused to describe to her colleagues. Some paranormal investigators believe the body in that preparation room was not moving on its own. They believe something had entered it, that whatever had been accumulating in that building in those weeks had found a vessel, and that the 2 minutes of movement was not the body fighting death. It was something else entirely settling in. The sealed operating room. A hospital in Lima, Peru made a decision that hospitals almost never make. They permanently sealed one of their operating rooms, not closed temporarily, not taken out of rotation, but sealed forever. The security footage from that room showed a dark shape slowly forming in the corner, and then the operating table, a piece of equipment that weighs hundreds of kilograms and sits on locked wheels, began sliding across the floor on its own. No one was touching it, no one was near it, it just moved. The hospital eventually decided that no amount of renovation or staff rotation was going to fix whatever was happening in there. They sealed the door and never opened it again. A hospital giving up entirely on one of its own operating rooms is not something that happens. Except this one time, in Lima, and the footage is exactly why. Some researchers who investigated this case believe what was captured in that room had nothing to do with death or spirits at all. They believe certain physical spaces develop what they call a negative energy vortex, a point where electromagnetic forces and atmospheric conditions combine in ways that produce genuinely unexplainable physical phenomena. Objects moving, shapes forming. The theory suggests that the specific construction of that room, its dimensions, its materials, its location within the building, created the perfect conditions for this kind of disturbance. Something purely physical, but completely outside current scientific understanding. The hospital did not seal that room out of fear. They sealed it because whatever was generating those forces showed absolutely no sign of stopping, and they had run out of explanations entirely. A vanishing stranger. A group of urban explorers entered an abandoned hospital in Thailand that had been shut down in 1998 following a patient's death due to medical malpractice. While moving through the hallways, they spotted a tall man pushing a wheelchair ahead of them. They called out to him. He did not respond. They walked toward him, and then he was gone. They looked around. Nothing. And then one of them felt something behind them. They turned around and the same figure was now seated in the wheelchair, behind them. The wheelchair that had just been empty and in front of them was now behind them, with someone sitting in it. They ran. And as they ran, they looked back one final time, and the figure had vanished completely. Here is the detail that nobody talks about enough. The hospital was shut down because someone died there due to negligence. The family never received full answers. Locals in the area have long believed that the spirit of that patient never left the building. Whether you believe that or not, the fact remains that 3 people entered that building, encountered the same figure twice in 2 different positions, with no physical explanation for how it moved, and left immediately and never returned. The shadow under the bed. A man was resting inside a clinic in Brazil when the security camera captured something emerging from the darkness beneath his bed. A large shadowy shape that looked unmistakably like a human hand slowly reached out from under the frame and moved deliberately toward his leg. When it made contact, the man jolted awake instantly and fled the room in a panic without looking back. The moment he left, the shape withdrew and disappeared completely, as if it had been waiting for him specifically. What unsettles researchers who have studied this footage is the deliberateness of the movement. This was not random. It reached toward a specific person in a specific direction with what looked like clear intention. The man avoided returning to that clinic for a long time afterward. And despite the footage being reviewed multiple times, no one has ever been able to explain what that shape was, where it came from, or how it vanished without leaving any trace. Some people who watch the footage say the most disturbing part is not the hand itself. It is the way it pulled back the moment he escaped, as though it knew he was gone. A pathologist's worst night. A forensic pathologist had just finished his work and paused to rest when he became aware of movement behind him. He turned around and encountered something that he later described as the most terrifying moment of his entire professional career. Think about who this man is. A forensic pathologist spends their career in rooms with dead bodies. They are trained specifically to be unafraid in those spaces. They know every sound a body makes after death, every movement, every process. Nothing in that environment is supposed to surprise them. And yet, whatever he saw behind him that night shook him in a way that nothing in decades of professional experience had prepared him for. What makes this story significantly darker is what happened days earlier. A colleague of his had experienced an almost identical encounter in the very same room and had reacted in precisely the same way. 2 separate professionals, same room, same experience, same reaction. The staff were deeply unsettled, not because of one incident, but because of a pattern forming in a room where patterns like that should be impossible. The escaping soul. Hospital C CTV footage that spread rapidly online showed a body lying completely motionless on a stretcher, and then a faint mist-like shape began to rise slowly from it, lifting upward and dispersing into the air above before disappearing completely. The footage divided everyone who saw it straight down the middle. Some people were absolutely convinced they were watching a soul leave a body on camera. Others insisted it was a camera malfunction or a lighting issue. But here is what silenced the debate in that review room. The staff who watched that footage together went completely quiet, not uncomfortable, not skeptical, but silent. These were medical professionals, people trained to stay composed in difficult situations, people who had seen things most of us never will. and that footage stopped every single one of them cold. A camera artifact does not do that to a room full of trained medical professionals. Whatever was on that recording went beyond anything their training had prepared them with a response for, and to this day, no official explanation has ever been released. A corpse that sat up. A doctor and a second staff member were transporting a body to the morgue when the body suddenly sat upright on the stretcher, without warning, without any preceding movement. It just sat up. Both staff members fled immediately. The security camera recorded the entire incident before cutting out just seconds later. No official explanation was ever given. Medically, this should be completely impossible. Sitting upright from a lying position requires coordinated muscle activation across multiple muscle groups simultaneously. That process requires active signals from the brain, and the brain had stopped functioning. So, what actually happened? Some medical professionals suggested the patient may have been incorrectly declared dead, a phenomenon known as Lazarus syndrome, where a person spontaneously revives after being declared deceased. It is rare but documented. Others believe something far darker was at play. Some researchers who study paranormal activity in hospitals believe that the moment of soul departure is sometimes violent and physically forceful, that the energy leaving the body can cause sudden involuntary movement. And then there is the camera cutting out within seconds of the incident. In a hospital with a functioning security system, that timing is almost impossible to explain as coincidence. Some people believe whatever caused that body to sit up also caused the camera to go dark, as though something in that corridor did not want to be recorded any further. Dead fingers that moved on camera. A morgue worker was casually recording while monitoring a deceased body when the hand began to move. Not a subtle shift. The fingers jerked in distinct separate motions that looked almost deliberate. The head also appeared to twitch slightly. The worker was visibly shaken. But here is where this entry is different from every other one on this list. A paramedic who reviewed the footage actually had a scientific explanation for it. After brain death, the spinal cord can continue generating automatic reflexes for hours, and in some cases up to a full day after death. These movements do not require the brain at all. They are purely mechanical responses from a system that has not fully shut down yet. Brief involuntary finger movements and slight head twitches fall exactly within that category. So science wins this one, mostly. Because here is the problem. That same spinal cord reflex explanation is the one people reach for every time a body moves unexpectedly in a hospital or morgue. And it only works for brief, random, isolated movements. It does not explain the body in Texas that moved repeatedly for 2 minutes. It does not explain the body that sat fully upright in the corridor. It does not explain the paralyzed patient you are about to hear about. Science drew a clear line with this entry. Everything beyond that line is something else entirely, and most of what is left on this list is beyond it. A paralyzed man who moved. A patient in a hospital ward had been completely paralyzed and dependent on life support for more than 2 years. 2 full years with absolutely no record of voluntary movement. Not a finger, not a toe, nothing. The medical team had documented this consistently across hundreds of assessments. His body simply could not move. And then without any warning, his body began moving violently. His limbs twisted with force and in directions that made no medical sense given his condition. At one point, he nearly lifted himself completely off the bed. A nurse rushed in immediately to restrain him and prevent injury. Eventually, the staff managed to calm him and secure him safely. And then, it never happened again. Not once after that day. The medical team had no clinical explanation. Complete paralysis means the neural pathways that produce movement are permanently severed. There is no mechanism in human physiology for what happened in that room. A 2021 medical study examining movement in completely paralyzed patients found 0 documented cases of this kind of episode in the entire research literature. Not rare, but 0. What the staff witnessed that day does not exist in medicine as a possibility, and yet every single person present watched it happen and could not explain a single second of it. The half-formed entity. A security guard at Santa Rosa Hospital in Honduras was patrolling a wing that had been taken out of service when he began hearing sounds coming from just ahead of him. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Near one of the doorways, a figure began to form, but it was only visible from the upper half downward. The lower portion simply did not exist, not hidden by shadow, just absent, as though whatever it was had not fully arrived yet or had not fully decided to show itself completely. The figure appeared to observe him before stepping further into view. The guard turned and ran immediately. Paranormal researchers who have studied this footage believe the figure was a residual spirit, the trapped energy of a patient who died in that wing and had not yet crossed over. The half-formed appearance, they argue, is consistent with a spirit that lacks the energy to fully manifest in the physical world. It can appear, but cannot completely materialize. Some go further and suggest the figure was deliberately showing itself partially as a warning, making itself just visible enough to be seen, but not so visible as to cause complete terror. Management reviewed that footage and stopped sending guards into that wing alone, because whatever that guard filmed in that corridor was real enough that they were not willing to risk another person encountering it by themselves. Footage they tried to bury. For weeks, staff at a hospital in Puebla, Mexico had been reporting something strange. Medical tools were being moved overnight. Patient files were turning up in completely different places by morning. Objects left in specific positions at the end of a shift were found somewhere else entirely by the start of the next one. Management dismissed every single report. They told staff it was carelessness and disorganization and to pay more attention. And then someone reviewed the hallway security footage, and management stopped dismissing the reports immediately. The footage showed chairs sliding across the floor on their own, drawers opening without anyone near them, corridors that had been completely orderly at the start of the night, left in total disarray by morning, as though something had moved deliberately through the entire space in the dark. Management watched all of that and made a decision that reveals everything about what they actually thought they were looking at. They hid it. They kept the footage internal and told nobody, because they were afraid of the reaction. That fear was well-founded. The footage leaked anyway. Patients demanded transfers. Staff began walking out. The hospital found itself managing a full crisis that was made significantly worse by the weeks of suppression that came before it. They had watched something impossible happen in their own building, and their first instinct was to pretend it had not. The impossible did not cooperate. A figure by the bed. A patient recovering in a hospital in the Philippines began to feel that something was wrong in his room. He noticed a tall, dark figure standing completely motionless beside the bed of the patient next to him. Nobody else in the room reacted. Nobody else seemed to see it at all. He picked up his phone and started recording to check whether he was imagining things. He was not imagining things. The camera confirmed exactly what he was seeing: a tall, dark shape standing beside a specific bed, completely still, positioned as though watching the person lying there. He later described it as looking like a grim reaper. He felt something that is hard to explain rationally. He felt relieved that it was not standing beside his bed, as though some part of him understood instinctively that the figure had come for a specific person, and he was not that person. Shortly afterward, the patient in the adjacent bed passed away. The figure was never seen in that room again. It had come for one specific person. It had stood beside them and waited, and it left when that person was gone. The rising arm. A morgue technician had completed an autopsy and was finishing the final steps of his work when the body's arm rose slowly and deliberately, similar to how a person raises their hand to get someone's attention. Not a twitch, not a brief reflex, a slow, controlled, deliberate lift. The technician left the room immediately and refused to return alone afterward. He was convinced that something had briefly come back to that body. Not a reflex, not a mechanical response. Something returning. Paranormal researchers and certain religious traditions have long described exactly this phenomenon: the belief that a spirit can briefly re-enter a body after death, drawn back by unfinished business, by a message it needed to deliver, or by a refusal to fully accept its own passing. Some cultures have documented accounts of the recently deceased making one final physical movement as a form of farewell or warning to those present. The technician did not know any of that in the moment. He simply saw a dead arm rise with controlled, deliberate intention and made the only rational decision available to him. He got out of that room as fast as he could, and he did not go back alone. A shadow that rose from a living man. Hospital C, CTV footage recorded inside a room shows a man lying in his bed, apparently asleep, and then a shadowy humanoid form begins to rise from within his body. It separates from him completely, sits upright above him, and then slowly ascends toward the ceiling until it disappears completely. The man remains in the bed below, still breathing as though nothing has just risen from inside him and floated away. The person who uploaded this footage never confirmed whether the man had actually died, and that missing detail is the most disturbing part of the entire clip. Because if he was alive when that form rose from him, the footage is showing something that has no scientific category at all. Not a soul departing at death. Something separating from a living body while that body continued breathing below it. Something that can exist inside a living person, detach from them, move independently through space, and dissolve into the ceiling while its host keeps sleeping undisturbed. Science has no framework for that. Not in biology, not in neuroscience, not anywhere. She woke up 3 days before they were going to pull the plug. Yvonne Sclair thought she had the flu. By the time she reached the hospital, her condition had become critical. The infection had entered her bloodstream and was attacking her organs. Doctors placed her on life support as her family gathered and began to pray. A date had been set. 3 days from that point, the medical team planned to remove life support. The trajectory of her condition had given them no medical reason to expect anything different. 3 days before that date, Yvonne woke up, not gradually, suddenly and completely. Her recovery was so unexpected and so immediate that her doctors described it openly as miraculous. During the period she was on life support, Yvonne later described leaving her body and entering a space filled with light and music, unlike anything she had known. She described encountering a presence she identified as Jesus and feeling an overwhelming sense of love before being told to return with a message. Whether you interpret that as a divine experience, a near-death hallucination, or something else entirely, the medical outcome is not in dispute. The team had chosen the date they were going to end her life support. 3 days before that date, she woke up completely recovered. Her doctors had no medical explanation for the speed or completeness of what happened. The word they used was miraculous. In a clinical setting, that word means they had nothing else. Near-death experience. Charlotte Holmes went to her heart doctor, expecting a routine appointment. Her blood pressure reading that day was 234/134. Before the medical team could respond, she lost consciousness. What she described when she came back is one of the most shocking near-death accounts ever recorded. She described floating above her body and watching the doctors work on her. She described a sudden sweet floral scent and music she had never heard before. She described being guided through a space of intense light, seeing gardens, and encountering people she recognized who had already died, all accompanied by a feeling of joy she said was unlike anything possible in ordinary life. She was then briefly shown a place of darkness and suffering before being pulled back into her body. What makes Charlotte's account different from a general description of light and peace is the specific details, the specific scent, the specific music, the specific faces. Near death, researchers have spent years specifically looking for accounts that contain verifiable details, things that happened in the medical room during unconsciousness that can be independently confirmed by staff who were present. Because those specific verifiable details are the ones that brain chemistry and oxygen deprivation cannot account for. Whether Charlotte's account contains that category of detail has never been fully answered, and that unanswered question is the most unsettling thing about her story. Dead for 27 minutes. On a February morning in 2018, Tina Hines went into sudden cardiac arrest and was clinically dead for 27 minutes. When she was finally revived, she could not speak because of the tracheostomy tube placed during resuscitation. But she did not wait until she could speak. She reached immediately for a notepad and wrote 3 words. It is real. She later explained that during those 27 minutes, she had stood before a glowing figure she identified as Jesus Christ, described his hands as radiating light, and said the experience felt more real than the hospital room she returned to. Here is what 27 minutes of clinical death means medically. The brain begins sustaining permanent damage after 4 to 6 minutes without oxygenated blood. After 10 minutes, the chances of survival with meaningful cognitive function are extremely small. After 27 minutes, the expected neurological outcome in the rare cases where a person survives at all is severe and permanent cognitive impairment. Tina Hines was revived after 27 minutes, and her first action was a deliberate, purposeful communicative act expressing a specific coherent message. Writing 3 words in sequence requires working memory, language processing, motor planning, and executive function simultaneously. These are precisely the cognitive systems that 27 minutes without circulation should have devastated completely. She did not produce confusion. She did not make disoriented movements. She wrote a message. 3 words, before she had fully processed where she was, before anything else at all. That was the thing she needed the world to know first. It is real, and the brain that wrote those 3 words had been without circulation for 27 minutes. Science has no comfortable answer for how it was still capable of saying anything at all.